My name is Malene Atwell, and I'm 31 years old. I repair antique clocks in a small Vermont town where, every single week, another truck hauls somebody's attic off to be sold by the box. My family thinks that's a hobby I never grew out of. My mom has a name she uses for me at holidays, and last Christmas she used it before I had my coat off. I handed my parents a small wrapped box. She laughed and said, "Let me guess. Another dollar store candle from the family disappointment." My dad didn't look up from his phone. My sister told me to open hers instead, because hers was actually worth something. So I took my box back, and I opened it myself, in front of all of them. But that box was not the end of this. It was the hinge. 4 months later, I stood up in a room full of buyers, in a building my grandmother worked in for 22 years, and I gave away the only thing I had left. On purpose. Out loud. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet ones, the people a family decided not to count, and what happens the year they stop asking to be counted. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The first week of March, I had an 1890 wall movement on my bench and a chipped pivot that had been driving me quietly out of my mind for 4 days. My shop sits at 12 Chapel Street in Clover Mill, Vermont, under the apartment I rented above it from my landlady. It smells like clock oil and old wood, and the space heater I keep meaning to replace. My customers are almost all over 70. They bring me kitchen clocks that cost $40 new and would cost $200 to fix, and they stand there with their hands folded while I tell them that, and then they say fix it anyway. That's most of my income. I make it work. I turned a new pivot out of blue steel that morning, and when I set the movement running and heard it take up its beat, I sat back and let myself be happy for about 90 seconds, which is my limit. Then a white truck went past my window. Clear Pine Estate Services, in green letters, my sister's company, riding low on its springs with the bed strapped full of banker's boxes and a dresser wrapped in blue moving blankets. That was the third week in a row. Clover Mill has 940 people in it, and there are more houses emptying than filling, and my sister empties them. That's not an insult. She's the best in 3 counties at it. She can walk into the house of a woman who died on Tuesday, and by Friday have every object in it priced, boxed, and routed to the right buyer, and she does it without ever once raising her voice at a grieving son. I watched the truck take the corner toward Rill Road, and I went back to my bench. And I did not know yet that the thing I had been hunting for 6 years was sitting in a plastic tote 40 miles east of me, mixed in with a bag of dead wristwatches and somebody's costume jewelry. Here is a thing about my trade that nobody finds interesting until it matters. I have watched every estate liquidation and consignment listing inside a 2-hour drive for 6 years. I keep a folder. I look at bad photographs of cardboard boxes taken by people who don't know what they're photographing, and about once a month I put a small bid on something because of a shape in the corner of a picture. Most of the time I am wrong. I have bought a tote of pot metal alarm clocks. I have bought a shoebox of gears that turned out to be from a sewing machine. My sister thinks this is gambling, and she isn't entirely wrong, except the odds are terrible, and the payout is usually just a story. On the 4th of March, a house clearance out in Cheshire County posted 11 photos of a garage. Photo 7 was a plastic tote shot from above, badly lit, and in the top left corner there was a nickel watch case lying open. Back off. The way a case sits when somebody has taken it apart and never put it together again. And the inside of that case back had marks on it. Not engraving. Scratches. Every clock and watchman for 150 years has scratched the date of a service into the inside of a caseback with a graver, so the next person knows who touched it and when, and it builds up over the decades like rings in a tree. You can't read them from a bad photo, but you can see them, and you can see the shape of the numbers. And one of those scratched numbers had a short bar over it in a style I had seen exactly one place in my life. I bid $340 on the whole tote, sight unseen, on a Tuesday night. And then I sat at my kitchen table for an hour trying to talk myself out of hoping. The tote came in a box packed with newspaper on the 11th. There were 22 things in it that were worth nothing. 2 quartz travel clocks with cracked cases, a bag of watch bands, a brass barometer with the movement gone. I laid them out on my bench in a row like I always do, because you never know. And then I got to the bottom, and there it was. A nickel-cased bench watch, 48 millimeters, dial browned at the 6, minute hand snapped off at the collet, and it weighed in my palm like a stone I'd been carrying my whole life without knowing. I turned the case back over under the lamp. Service scratches going back decades, layered over each other. And down at the edge, cut small and shallow and slow, the way you cut something when you're not supposed to be cutting it at all. 2 initials, and under them the number 114, with the crossbar through the numeral that I had only ever seen in one place in my life, on the 2 Chandler bench watches Roland Cobb kept in the second drawer of his desk. Chandler Clockworks ran in Clover Mill from 1911 to 1974, 4 stories of brick at the bottom of Chapel Street, and at its peak it had 200 people in it making cheap, honest kitchen movements that went into houses all over the country. Every finisher at Chandler was issued a bench watch, numbered to their bench, to regulate against. My grandmother Luella Cardwell went to work there in 1952, when she was 18. She sat at bench 114 until the day they locked the doors. She was 40 then. Her watch sat on the windowsill over her kitchen sink for the rest of her life, and she wound it every Sunday after church. And when I was 6 years old, she let me hold it while she did the dishes and told me not to breathe on the dial. She died in 2011. I was 18. I sat down on the floor of my own shop with my back against the cabinet and I held that watch in both hands. And the only thing in my head was a question. How did it get 40 miles away into a stranger's garage? I did not ask that question out loud at Sunday dinner, and if you've had a family like mine, you already know why. My parents live at 41 Rill Road, 6 minutes from my shop, in the house they have been in since 1988. My mother Colleen is 63, and worked the front office at Clover Mill Elementary for 24 years. She has one defense mechanism, and it is very good. She marks everything down before anybody can want it. The pot roast is dry, the town is finished. That coat looked better on the hanger. If she decides a thing is worth nothing first, then it can't cost her anything later, and she's been doing it so long I don't think she can hear herself do it. My father Lyle is 66 and had a business on Chapel Street called Atwell Lumber and Supply until 2009, and since then he has not said its name in my hearing once. He sits at his own table looking at his phone. That night my sister Cassidy came in 40 minutes late, still in her work coat, smelling like other people's basements, and she put her keys down and said she'd landed the Corbin Hale estate. My mother said that was wonderful without asking what it was. I asked what it was. Cassidy looked at me over the top of her water glass and said, "The Clockworks, the building, the contents, all of it. He held it for 51 years and never did a thing with it, and his heirs are in 2 states and want it wound up. Everything in that building, sold off by the box. I had a watch from that building in my coat pocket, on the hook by the door, 10 feet from where I was sitting. I did not say a word about it, and it wasn't because I was scared of them. It was because I knew exactly what would happen. Somebody at that table would ask what it was worth." Cassidy let me walk the building with her on a Thursday while she did her first inventory pass, because she is not cruel and because she needed somebody to hold the other end of a tape measure. The stairs still had the rubber treads. The second floor was the finishing room, and I stopped in the doorway like an idiot, because there were 32 benches in there, still bolted through the floorboards, in 4 rows, with the light coming in high and cold through window glass, so old it had ripples in it. Somebody had stacked chairs on half of them in 1974, and nobody had touched them since. The wood on the front edge of each bench was worn down in a shallow curve where forearms had rested for 60 years. I put my hand on one. Cassidy wrote numbers on her clipboard and told me the whole floor would go as bulk lots, tools by the crate, and that a man from out of state had already asked about the building itself. At the back wall there was a steel 4-drawer file cabinet, gray, dented, and when I pulled the second drawer it came out heavy. Ledgers, cloth-bound, maybe 40 of them, water-stained along the bottom edge. I opened one at random and it was a finishing book. Date, movement number, bench number, and a name in a different hand every few lines where the foreman had changed. 1961. I ran my finger down the column and found a line, and I closed the book before my sister looked up, and I put it back and shut the drawer. I don't know why I did that. I have thought about it a lot since. I think I already understood that the second she knew what was in that cabinet, it would have a price on it, and I wanted it to be a thing for one more day before it became a number. Roland Cobb is 78 and he lives at Larkfield Memory Care, 25 minutes out Route 103, and he taught me everything I know. I apprenticed under him from 2013 to 2019, 6 years of him standing behind my right shoulder saying nothing until I did something wrong. When his memory started going in 2022, he signed the shop over to me. The bench, the tools, the collection of American movements he'd been assembling since he was 24. People hear that and think I got handed something. What I got handed was a storage problem. I have paid to insure, heat, and hold that collection for 2 years out of a business that clears maybe $31,000 in a good year, and I have never once resented it, and I have also never once been able to breathe easy about it. That March, I brought him a cup of the coffee he likes and a mainspring winder to hold. He wasn't sure about my name. He called me the girl from Chapel Street, which is close enough, and then he asked after my mother by the wrong first name. But I put a pair of tweezers in his right hand, and something in his forearm woke up, and his fingers rolled them into position without him looking, the way they had for 60 years, because the hands go last. We sat there. I told him about the watch. I don't know how much of it landed. When I stood up to go, he caught my sleeve and said the thing he used to say to me over and over when I was 20 and impatient, and he said it like it had just occurred to him. A clock doesn't keep time, it keeps a promise. And then, in the doorway, without any weight on it at all, he told me to keep his bench together. Don't let anybody break it up. I said I wouldn't. I meant it. I asked my sister to pull one drawer out of the sale. I picked a Tuesday morning to do it, at her office, because at our parents' table she has an audience, and at her office she has a schedule. And a schedule is easier to argue with than an audience. I told her the ledgers in that cabinet were the only record of who built what in that building, and that as a bulk paper lot they'd be pulped or scattered inside a month. I asked her to set them aside, donate them, or sell them to me for whatever a crate of damp paper is worth, and I would carry them out myself. She let me finish. She always lets you finish. It's part of why she's good. Then she explained, in order, why she couldn't. She isn't the owner. She's the agent for an estate with 2 heirs in 2 states, and she has a signed contract that says every item goes to sale and every dollar goes to the estate. She can't gift a dead man's property to her sister, and if she tried, the heir's attorney would eat her alive, and Clearpine would never get another referral in this county. She was right about all of it. The whole building was going on the block on site, the second Saturday in April, 13 months out, because Crandall and Rowe only run sales that size in the spring, and it takes that long to inventory 4 floors. You want me to carve out the one thing you happen to care about, she said, and call it housekeeping. I said that wasn't fair. She said fair had nothing to do with it, and then she said the thing I have been turning over in my hands ever since, in that flat, patient, almost kind voice she uses on people who have just lost a parent. Nothing is worth what you feel about it. It's worth what somebody hands you for it. She wasn't being cruel. That's the part nobody believes when I tell it. She was explaining her actual religion to me slowly, because she thought I hadn't heard it yet. The Clover Mill Historical Society is 2 rooms over the old fire bay on Chapel Street, and it is run by Harriet Lund, who is 68, and who taught my sister 8th grade civics. I went in on a Saturday with photographs of the file cabinet and a 2-page list I'd made of what I thought was in it. Harriet made tea in a pot with a chipped spout and listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting, which is more than anyone in my family has ever done. The society has 411 paid members, of whom about 9 do anything. They have a Civil War drum, 60 years of the county newspaper on rolls, and a bucket under a seam in the roof that somebody empties on a schedule. She told me she'd put it to the board at the annual meeting in January. She told me she thought it was important. She also said something that stuck under my ribs, and she said it looking at the bucket and not at me. Everybody in this town wants us to keep things. Nobody wants to pay the heat bill on them. I walked home along Chapel Street past the empty storefront that used to be my father's lumber and supply, which has been a vacancy for 15 years with a faded closed sign still hanging crooked in the door, and past my own shop. And I thought about how a town keeps saying it's proud of its history right up until history costs $40 a month. Harriet said she'd call me. She meant it. That night, I sat down at my bench with the bench watch under the lamp and the case back off, and I started what I already knew was going to take me the better part of a year, because there wasn't a single thing in that watch I could fix quickly, and there wasn't a single thing in my life I could fix at all. Restoration is not repair. Repair is making a thing work. Restoration is making a thing work while leaving its life on it, and the hard part is knowing what not to touch. The mainspring was set and tired, so that got replaced, because a spring is a consumable and nobody in 100 years will care. The balance staff had a bent pivot, so I turned a new staff on the lathe over 4 evenings and burnished it, and it took me 3 tries. The crystal was gone. I fit a new one. And then I sat with the dial for a long time, and I left it exactly as it was. Browned at the 6 where 70 years of somebody's thumb had gone in to set it. A hairline under the 12. There are men who would have refinished that dial and gotten $100 more for it and erased my grandmother's thumb. $210 in parts, and every evening from April to December. And I want to be honest with you about something, because I've had a year to look at it. I loved doing it. I loved it more than I have ever loved talking to a person. Sitting with a dead machine and slowly making it alive again is the only thing in my life I have ever been completely good at. And it costs nothing except time, and nothing ever asks you to choose. You just keep everything. You keep every part, every screw, every original hand, and nothing is ever lost, and you never once have to decide what you're willing to give up. If you're listening to this while you fix something nobody else thinks is worth fixing, a chair, a rusted pan, a marriage, I'd like to know. Tell me in the comments what you're keeping alive. And if this is where you come to feel less alone about your own family, subscribe so the next one finds you. In October, my sister gave me 3 hours in the building before her sorting crew boxed the second floor into lots. She set a timer on her phone, told me not to carry anything out, and went downstairs to argue with a scrap hauler. I opened that file cabinet and I read for 3 hours standing up. There were 38 finishing books, 1922 through 1974, and they were not summaries. They were daily. Every movement that came off that floor got a line, the date, the movement number, the bench it was finished at, and the surname and first initial of the person who finished it. Bench 4, Rowley, E. Bench 19, Chapman, L. Bench 31, Herrick, M. I counted the distinct benches, and I counted the distinct people, and across the last 2 decades of the shop there were 41 names, and 36 of them were women. That is what a finishing room was. That is who sat in it. And on the page for the 12th of November 1961, bench 114, Cardwell, H. I have her old employment record in a folder at home because I pulled it after she died. Under occupation it says assembler, not clockmaker, not finisher. Assembler, which is the word you use for a person who is interchangeable, and she sat at the same bench for 22 years, and her hands are inside movements in houses in every state in this country. I stood in that room with a cloth book open on my forearm, and I understood 2 things at once. The first was that this was the only complete run of records that shop ever produced, and it had survived by pure accident in a cabinet nobody bothered to open. The second one took me another 5 months to understand, and when I did understand it, it cost me everything I had. I tried my mother in November. I did it carefully, at her kitchen table, with a dish towel in my hand so I'd have something to do. I said I'd been thinking about Grandma Luella's kitchen, the one on Larch Street with the yellow curtains, and I asked her if she remembered the watch on the windowsill over the sink, the one Luella wound on Sundays. My mother was rinsing a colander. She held still for 1 beat longer than a person holds still, and the water kept running, and then she shut it off and said, "There was no watch. You're remembering a picture." I said I wasn't. I said I'd held it. She dried her hands on the towel I was holding, which is a thing she does, and she said it again the same way. And then she went on to something else, my father's cholesterol, the price of heating oil. And she never came back to it. That was the moment I stopped thinking my family had forgotten something. You do not go still like that over a thing you forgot. And a few minutes later, while she was putting the colander away, she said the other half of it without any heat in her voice at all, the way you'd read a label. "Your grandmother put clock parts in a box for 22 years. That's not a career, honey. That's a job." I sat there with the dish towel. I understood the shape of it then, even if I couldn't have said it out loud. In our family, if you decide the thing you lost was never worth anything, then you never lost anything. It's a very efficient system. It has kept my mother upright for 15 years. And the only problem with it is that it needs everyone to agree, and I was the one who kept not agreeing. And eventually, a system like that has to do something about a person like me. I went by on a Wednesday in December to drop off a storm window I'd had reglazed, and my father was in the garage alone with the door half up and the propane heater going. He had his phone 6 inches from his face, thumb on the screen, pulling down to refresh. I said his name twice. When he finally turned, he turned the phone face down against his leg, and that told me more than the screen would have. I asked him. He is not a man who lies well, and he is 66, and he was tired. It was the Clover Mill savings account page. He'd been refreshing it every hour or so for most of a year, the way you'd worry a loose tooth. They were 5 months behind on the house. With the late fees and the town taxes, it came to $21,800, and he said the number out loud in the flat voice of a man who has said it to himself so many times, it stopped meaning anything. He had not told my mother the whole figure. He had not told me at all. My father ran a lumberyard on Chapel Street for 22 years and had an account at that bank since he was 19, and he could not walk in there now and look at the woman behind the counter, who he coached in softball. That's the part he actually said out loud. Not the money. The counter. Then he put the phone in his coat pocket and picked up the storm window and said, "Your sister's got a plan. She always does." And I stood there in a cold garage in December and did the arithmetic that I think you have already done, which is that there was exactly one plan in this family, and it involved a building full of benches, and a steel cabinet, and 38 cloth-bound books with my grandmother's name in them. On Christmas Eve, I wound it for the last time before I wrapped it. It had been running on my bench for 9 days by then, which is how you prove out a job. You don't trust a watch until it's told you the truth for a week. It ran 40 seconds fast a day. I could have corrected that. I could have taken a little off the hairspring or moved the regulator hard over, but the regulator was already near the end of its travel, and going further would have meant replacing something that Luella's hands had set, and I wasn't going to do that, so a machine could be more accurate for a person who was dead. So it runs 40 seconds fast. It still does. I put it in a box that was smaller than my hand, on a bed of cotton wadding, and I wrapped it in brown craft paper because I didn't have any Christmas paper, and because I have never in my life been able to make a bow lie flat. Then I sat in my truck outside my own shop with the heater on and practiced what I was going to say. I had a whole thing. It had the year in it, and the county, and the bench number, and a line about how she used to let me hold it. It was, I want to be clear, a speech, and I have never once in my life delivered a speech to my family successfully. I said it out loud twice to the windshield. Then I put the box in my coat pocket, and I drove the 6 minutes to Rill Road the next morning with it against my ribs. And I want you to understand that I was not going there to win anything. I was going there to give my mother her mother back. That is all I wanted. I have never gotten anything that clean out of that house in my life. Christmas morning at 41 Rill Road runs on a schedule. Coffee, then the grandchild's presents, then the adults, Then my mother starts the ham at 11 whether anyone is finished or not. Lena, who is 9, had already gotten through most of a plastic bin of things. My father was in his chair with his phone. My sister was on the arm of the couch in a green sweater with her coffee balanced on her knee, and my mother was picking wrapping paper off the rug because she cannot sit in a room with paper on the floor. I waited until it was quiet, and I took the small brown box out of my coat, and I put it in my mother's hands and said it was for both of them. And my mother looked at it, and she laughed the short laugh she uses like a door closing, and she said, "Let me guess. Another dollar store candle from the family disappointment." My father did not look up from his phone, and my sister said, without any particular malice, "The way you'd redirect a toddler. Just open mine instead. It's actually worth something." Hers was a coffee machine. The price sticker was still on the corner of the box. I want to tell you that something in me broke right then, but that isn't what happened. What happened is that I got very calm, the way I get when a pivot won't seat, and I reached over and I took my box back out of my mother's hands. I sat down on the edge of the coffee table. I peeled the tape off myself, one seam at a time because I wasn't going to tear it. I lifted the watch out of the cotton and I held it up. And I said, in a voice that came out steadier than I expected, "This is bench 114 at Chandler Clockworks. It's your mother's. It came out of a garage in Cheshire County in March, and it's been on my bench since April, and it's been running for 9 days." My mother's face did something I had never seen it do. It came apart. Not gracefully. She made a sound like she'd been caught at something, and put both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders went. And she made a sound into her palms that wasn't a word at all. And my father finally looked up. He put his phone face down on the arm of the chair, which for him is the whole thing. That's his entire vocabulary right there, and he stared at it with his mouth slightly open like a man looking at a room he used to live in. And nobody said anything for a while, and in that quiet, every person in that room could hear it going. Here is what I thought would happen next, since I'd had 9 months to build it. My mother would hold it, and she would tell Lena about the yellow curtains, and my father would say his mother-in-law's name, and we would have 1 hour of being a family that remembered something together. Here is what actually happened. My mother took it out of my hands. She held it for about 4 seconds. I watched her thumb find the browned patch at the 6 without her looking, which told me everything about how many thousands of times she had watched her own mother do exactly that. Then she set it down on the side table, face up, and she stood and said the ham needed to go in, and she went into the kitchen and ran the water. My father said, "That's a nice piece of work." That is the sentence he uses about a well-built deck. He did not pick it up. The only person in that house who touched it again was Lena, who came and knelt by the side table and asked if she could hear it, so I picked it up and held it against her ear, and she went completely still, and then whispered that it was fast, and I told her it was, on purpose, and she thought that was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. And that was Christmas. I got my coat around noon, and in the driveway, my sister was standing by the front wheel of her truck with her arms crossed, waiting for me in the cold without a coat on, which means she had been standing there deciding for a while. She didn't lead into it. She looked at the side of my head and she said, flat, like a line item, "I sold it." She was 21 in 2010. I was 17. That's the part I need you to hold on to, because I have spent 15 years being angry about that year, without ever once doing that arithmetic in front of a mirror. Dad's yard had gone under the previous fall. The bank gave them 90 days. My mother could not get out of bed for most of February, and my father could not go into that building on Chapel Street to sell his own inventory. So my sister did it. 19 years old the first time she priced a stranger's things, and 21 when she priced ours. She sold the truck, the good furniture, my father's tools, the contents of 2 closets and an attic. And she stood in the yard with a folding table and a cash box while men she'd gone to high school with picked over it. And she found the watch on the windowsill and she took it upstairs and she put it in her sock drawer, and she told me, standing in that driveway on Christmas Day with her arms crossed and no coat, that she kept it in there for 6 weeks, that she took it out at night. that she drove it to a dealer in Cheshire County in April and got $90 for it and cried the whole way back on Interstate 89 with the radio off. And then she said, "And then I stopped crying, because crying doesn't pay anything." I said her name. I got that far. And she shut it down like a breaker throwing and said the thing that took the floor out from under me for the next 4 months. "Don't you dare be the hero of a story you got to sit out. You were 17. I was the one who signed." Then she got in her truck. And she was right. And I hated it. And I still hate it. And every hard thing I did after that came out of standing in that driveway knowing she was right. Crandall and Rowe put the preliminary listing up on the 9th of January. 4 floors, 640 lots, viewing by appointment. I scrolled for 20 minutes with a cup of coffee going cold beside me until I found it. Lot 218. Chandler Clockworks. Contents of second floor finishing room. Benches, hand tools, parts stock, steel file cabinet with contents including production record books. Estimate $8,000 to $12,000. That's all it said. Somebody had walked through that room with a clipboard and priced my grandmother's 22 years at the low end of a used car. And I want to be precise here, because the number matters for everything that comes after. I had $6,400. That was the whole cushion. That was 11 years of putting away what I could out of a business that fixes $40 kitchen clocks for $200 because somebody's mother used to wind it. 6,400 against an estimate that started at 8, in a room where dealers were going to be standing with their hands in their pockets, on a Saturday in April, with a buyer's premium on top. I did the math 3 times looking for a version where it worked, and there wasn't one. And then I did something I had never done in my life. I got a legal pad, and I wrote at the top of it, "Things I could sell." And I sat there with the pen in my hand for a long time before I wrote anything down, because there was only ever going to be one line on that list, and I already knew what it was, and I was not ready to see it in my own handwriting. Lorraine Crisp is 74, and she has owned the 4 brick storefronts on the north side of Chapel Street since her husband died in '96. She came into my shop on the last Friday in January in her good coat, which meant she'd come from something, and she stood by the counter and did not sit down. She sold the block. All 4 buildings, to Crosswater Holdings, which is a name on a filing, and not a person you can call. She apologized twice before she got the sentence out. She's 74. Her knees are gone. She has been climbing to my apartment landing to fix a radiator valve for 6 years, and the offer was more money than the buildings have ever been worth, and she said the word sorry like it was a thing she could hand me across the counter. My lease runs to the 30th of June. Crosswater is not renewing anything on that block. They sent 1 letter, and it was efficient. And I stood in my own shop that afternoon looking at a wall of movements hanging on nails, and it landed on me sideways. The same current that had rolled through Corbin Hale's building was now coming up Chapel Street, and it was going to pick up my bench, my landlady's retirement, and my father's old lumberyard sign in the same pass, and there was nobody driving it. My sister just knew how to steer. She didn't start it. That's the part I would like to be able to say and can't. Nobody in this story started it. We were all just standing where it went. Harriet Lund called me on the 3rd of February, and she did not make me wait through small talk, which I appreciated more than I could say. The board voted no, not because they didn't care. She said 2 of them cried, which I believe, because in a town this size, the board is made of people whose mothers also worked in that building. They voted no because the society has no insurance rider that would cover it. No climate control, 400 square feet of dry floor, and a roof. They've been raising money to fix since 2017. 38 cloth-bound ledgers with water damage on the bottom edge need a stable room and somebody to turn them. Harriet said it straight, and it is the single kindest cruel thing anybody said to me all year. We can't take care of it, and I won't pretend we can. I said I understood. I did understand. That's what made it unsurvivable. If she had been lazy or dismissive, I could have been angry, and anger is a fuel I know how to run on, and instead, she just told me the truth and closed the last door in the building. I want to ask you something before this goes where it goes. Is there a thing in your family that everybody agreed to call worthless? A house? A language? A trade? A person? Put it in the comments. I read them. And if you want to see how far I was willing to go, stay with me and hit subscribe so you don't lose the ending. There is a door at the back of my shop that I open about twice a year. Behind it is Roland Cobb's bench, exactly as it came out of his shop on Chapel Street in 2022. The top with 60 years of burn marks and one long gouge from a lathe accident in the 70s. The pegboard with his tools still hanging in the order his hand knew. Staking set, wheel-cutting engine. 3 drawers of gravers he ground himself. And in the cabinet under the window, the collection. 50 years of American movements, bought one at a time out of barns and church sales, a Chandler run almost complete, and the tall case movement from Rutledge County that he was still talking about in the home. I know what all of it is worth, because appraising is part of my trade and because I have insured it every year. Fully broken up and properly cataloged, in the right sale, with the tools going by the crate to working shops, it would bring somewhere in the 30s. I sat down on the stool in that back room on the 4th of February with my coat still on, and I did not turn the light on. I sat there until the window went from gray to black. I kept thinking about him catching my sleeve in that doorway. Don't let anybody break it up. He said it like it was nothing. He said it the way you'd ask somebody to water a plant. And there was not one other thing on that legal pad. There was never going to be. I drove the 25 minutes out Route 103 on a Thursday, and I told him. That was the decision I made, that I was not going to do it behind his back, even though every practical person in my life would have told me that going out there was for me and not for him. I sat in the chair by his window with the radiator ticking, and I told Roland Cobb that I was going to sell his collection and his bench and his tools, and I told him why. The records from the finishing room, the 41 names, my grandmother at bench 114, my parents' house. He listened to all of it. He listened with his whole face, the way he used to listen when I explained why I'd done something the long way. And when I stopped, he was quiet for a second. And then he asked me who I was. I sat there for another 20 minutes. I got the tweezers out of my coat pocket, because I always have a pair, and I put them in his right hand, and his fingers rolled them into position, and he picked a thread off his blanket and set it down on the windowsill with the precision of a man doing surgery, and he smiled at it. On the drive back, I did not cry, which I am not going to pretend was strength, because I have cried over stuck screws. Some things go past the part of you that does that. I signed the consignment agreement with Crandall and Rowe on the Friday. The final catalog went to press 48 hours later, and that is the exact moment my old life ended, and I knew it while it was happening. The second that page was printed, his bench was not a bench anymore. It was Lot 61. I had photographs of 11 pages from those ledgers on my phone from October, and in March I started matching them against every Chandler movement that had ever been on my bench, and against the 4 I own, and against a list of serial ranges I'd been keeping since I was 23, because I am the kind of person who keeps a list like that. It took me 9 nights. What I established, standing at my bench at 2 in the morning with a loop in my eye, was this. Those books do not just record production, they assign every movement to a bench, and every bench to a person, by name, for 52 years. There is no other run like it. The company's corporate paper burned in the '68 fire. The Union Hall is a laundromat. Every other American shop of that size threw its finishing books in a dumpster the week it closed. 36 women's names, with dates and serials attached, in an American factory record. I sat down on my stool and I understood exactly what I was holding, and I understood the second thing at the same time, and it made me feel sick. Lot 218 was estimated at $8,000 because it looked like a truckload of dirty tools and damp paper. It looked like that because nobody who had walked through that room knew what they were looking at. And there was exactly one person in the state of Vermont whose word on it would be taken as authority. That was the whole trap, and I had built it myself, out of 12 years of learning a dead trade. Chester Renwick called me on the 22nd of March, and he was polite about it, which somehow made it worse. He is 71. He has a collection in Connecticut that people write articles about. He'd gotten the printed catalog and he'd seen Roland's name attached to lot 61, and he said kind and accurate things about Roland's eye, and then he asked me the question in the same tone he'd asked about the weather. Was there anything else interesting coming out of that Vermont works? Anything not obvious from the listing? And I stood at my own bench with my thumb on the edge of the wood and I heard myself say, "Nothing you'd want." He said that was a shame and thanked me and hung up, and I put the phone down and did not move for a while. It was so easy. It took less than a breath. Say nothing, let it stay a truckload of junk, bid my 6,400 plus whatever Roland's bench brought, and buy it for the price of a used pickup. And it stays in Clovermill. And I open a bench and teach somebody, and my grandmother's name stays in a drawer in a building I own a corner of. And that same afternoon, my sister sent me a photograph of a payoff quote from Clovermill Savings with the number circled in ballpoint, 21,800. Under it she'd typed, "Proceeds should clear this if the second floor performs. If lot 218 sold for 8,000, it wouldn't." And I sat in my shop between those two facts for 3 weeks and did not tell one living person which way I was going to go, because I did not know. The second Saturday in April came up cold and white. They ran the sale on site, on the second floor of the Chandler building, because that's how Crandall and Rowe do the big ones. Folding chairs set up in the aisles between the benches, a portable podium, an oil heater knocking in the corner, and about 60 people in coats. Town people came to look. 8 dealers came to buy. 3 more were on the phones. My sister worked the floor with a clipboard and a headset, and she was the calmest person in that room. Roland's lots went in the first hour, the way added consignments do, before the crowd tires. Lot 61 was the bench. It went to a shop out of Rutledge County for $9,200. The staking set and the wheel-cutting engine went separately. The collection went in 4 lots to 2 phone bidders and a man in the third row, with a canvas bag. $38,500, all in, split 3 ways, and walking out 3 different doors, and after the house took its 20%, I had $30,800 coming to me on a check in 10 business days. I sat in the 4th row from the back and watched 2 men in work gloves carry the top of Roland Cobb's bench down a set of stairs he'd walked up as an apprentice in 1964. I had the money. That was the whole point. That was what I'd traded him for. And I want to tell you what it felt like to have it, because I think people expect a scene, and it wasn't a scene. It felt like nothing at all. It felt like a room with the furniture taken out. My parents came in around 10. I didn't know they were coming. My father stood at the back by the stairwell with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the ceiling joists the way a lumberman does. And my mother came down the side aisle and stopped at my row, and then she sat down in the folding chair next to me without a word. She smelled like her house. She put her purse on her lap and held it with both hands and stared straight ahead at the podium, and we sat there like 2 strangers at a bus stop. Lena was up on the deep windowsill at the end of the room with her boots swinging. Lot 218 was 14 lots away. And I got up, and I walked down the side of the room to the clerk's table, and I asked to speak to the agent for the estate. My sister came over with her clipboard against her chest. I asked her, in front of the clerk, for permission to say something about provenance from the floor before Lot 218 opened. It's an ordinary request. Sellers grant it all the time when somebody knows the history of a piece. It makes the room lean in. She looked at me for a good while. I watched her do the arithmetic behind her eyes. A local expert stands up and talks about the lot gets warm, the lot brings more, the estate gets more, her commission gets more, the payoff quote with the number circled in ballpoint gets covered. And she said, "1 minute, don't editorialize." She gave me the minute because she thought she knew what I was going to do with it. So did I, right up until about 9 seconds before I did it. The auctioneer said my name and my trade and handed me the handheld, and the room did what rooms do, which is get quiet in a lumpy, half-interested way, and I stood up in the 4th row from the back. I did not go to the front. I have thought about why, and I think it was because I wanted to be standing between the benches. I said what the building was. A finishing shop that ran from 1911 to 1974 and put movements into ordinary kitchens in every state in this country. I said what the cabinet was, 38 production ledgers, 1922 through 1974, unbroken. I said what made them unlike anything else on the market, and I said it plainly because you only get 1 minute. Those books do not record output. They record attribution. Every movement is tied to a bench, and every bench is tied to a person, by surname and initial, for 52 years. The corporate records burned in 68. This is the only place these people exist. Then I took the bench watch out of my coat pocket and I set it on the corner of the clerk's table, close to the microphone stand, face up and running. And I read the names. Rand, C bench 2. Lucier, A bench 7. Chapman, L bench 19. Hebert, D bench 22. Herrick, M sur bench 31. Rousseau, P Kraft, J Hodgkins, E Lamoureux, T. I read all 41, slowly, and I did not explain any of them, and by about the 15th name that room had gone so quiet that between the names you could hear the watch on the table. 36 of them were women. Their government paperwork calls them assemblers. And I finished the way I had practiced in my truck at 6 that morning, which was the only part I'd practiced. Cardwell, H bench 114, 1952 to 1974. That one was my grandmother. And then I said the only sentence in this whole story that I would call mine. Every one of them was told this wasn't worth anything. So was I. I'd like the record to say otherwise. I put the microphone down on the table next to the watch. I sat down. My auction paddle was face down on my knee, and it stayed there, and I never lifted it once. They opened lot 218 at $9,000, and it was at 22 before the auctioneer had finished his second breath. The room had changed temperature. 2 of the phone bidders came in at the same time. The man in the third row with the canvas bag dropped out at 31 and turned around in his seat to look at me, and I could not read his face at all. At 45,000 there were 3 left. At 60 it was 2. And I sat there in a folding chair with $30,800 coming to me in 10 business days, and my paddle face down on my knee, and watched it go past everything I had, and then past everything I could have had. And I did that on purpose. And I would like to tell you I felt righteous. I felt like I was drowning very slowly in a room full of people in coats. Chester Renwick took it at $74,000, on the phone from Connecticut, and the hammer came down, and 41 names left the state of Vermont in a box truck the following Tuesday. And somewhere around 68,000, my mother, who had not said a word to me all morning, who had not looked at me once, who was still holding her purse with both hands, reached over and put her hand around my wrist. She didn't turn her head. She didn't squeeze. She just closed her hand around my wrist and left it there. And she kept it there for the rest of the lot, and for the 2 lots after that. My mother is 63 years old, and she has never once in my life said she was sorry for anything. That was it. That was the entire apology, delivered in a folding chair without a word, over the sound of a man in a headset selling my grandmother by the crate. And I let her keep her hand there, and I have never told her that I knew what it was. I went to the clerk's table before I went anywhere else. Nobody in my family paid for what I did that morning. That was the one thing I would